edition of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career Outreach Coordinator at the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at KU.
Hello and welcome to another season of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career and Outreach Coordinator for the KU School of Journalism and Mass Communications. Today we are joined by KU alum Devan Burris, producer at CNBC Digital. Welcome, Devan.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
All the way from New York. When we heard you were in town, we had to set you up in studio. So what brings you to Lawrence?
Well, I am meeting with some family and doing some wedding planning. Very exciting today. And yeah, when I was invited to do this, I wanted to be able to come here and see the new studio and sit down and chat with you. So yeah, I came out here and now I'm in Lawrence, and it's exciting. Exciting to see all this, to sit down with you, be able to finally be on here, be on Cheers to Careers.
So is it hard to believe it's been, what, 5 years?
Gosh,
since
yeah,
you graduated?
almost 5 years, 2019. So yeah.
A little over 5 years.
Yeah.
Is that hard to believe?
It's coming up. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's crazy. I come back and I feel like everything, I'm like, it hasn't been too long since I've been here, right? And then I see things that have changed, like Stauffer Flint's changed so much, Dole's changed so much. And, there's new buildings going up and buildings getting redone. And it's a little wild to see all the changes that it feels like, just yesterday we were walking down the hill and Memorial Stadium was completely put together and now it's in pieces right now, but yeah.
So how would you describe your role? I know you produce a lot of content. I mean, politics, business, technology. I mean, are you doing something new every day? I would assume that's part of the appeal of the job.
Yeah, a little bit. I do a little bit of everything. I guess series that my mini doc fall under is called the Big Picture series. So the idea is that I take something that's maybe in the news or that people have kind of been starting to talk about a little bit, and I zoom out and I say, what's the context around this, right? One of the examples that I use is I did a video on Temu, and it was last year, and I remember sitting watching the Super Bowl and seeing this ad for this company. I was like, what is Temu, and how can they afford 2 Super Bowl ads, right? And I went to my boss and I said, did you see these commercials? And he said, yeah, I thought that was kind of odd. And I was like, I got to look into this because I've seen people starting to talk about it, right? Family members, people on Facebook buying stuff from them. And I was like, what is happening with this? So I went in and I just started to dig around and found there's a lot happening with this company, and it goes into Chinese trade and it goes into U.S. politics. I had to sit down with a representative and talk about how they're dealing with things like the payment for customs coming in, right? Because Temu has a way where they can circumnavigate customs and fees that they have to pay there. So it's just kind of the ideas that I go into are, here's something small, what's the big picture around this, and then put that into an economic and business perspective.
And how much time do you have to produce like those mini docs? Because I know we were talking a little bit earlier about how you did more of the daily deadline content. Do you have a little bit more time to dig deeper into those mini docs?
Yeah, absolutely. I have probably about a month to turn, a month and a half if I can wiggle my way into that and convince my seniors that I might need a little bit more time to work on this. But yeah, about a month and a half is when I try to get it in. A lot of times it's because a lot of those stories, even though they are long form, do have a news hook, right? So we don't want to get too far away from that news hook. I just did a story on Walgreens, how Walgreens is closing down almost 2,000 locations, right? So I wanted to dig into that, and while the idea was, why are all these pharmacies shutting down, right? All of a sudden I hear Rite Aid's going bankrupt, CVS is shutting down places. I wanted to dig into that, but I also didn't want to get too far away from that news hook where people forgot about the initial Walgreens story. So I try to keep it as close to that original news hook as possible, but at the same time, I want to give the story enough time to where I can really go all in and get what I need and produce a really well-researched and well-developed story that people are still going to be interested in at that far out.
Now, do you get to travel on location for these stories, or just pretty much get to do it all in studio?
I pretty much do it in studio. I am in the New York City area, which is great because there have been times where I've been able to, especially being in New York City, go and sit down with people. I sat down with the CEO of Warby Parker. I did a story on direct-to-consumer companies, and we were able to go to one of their flagship New York stores and sit down with the co-CEO, and that was really cool. And I got to, be a little bit of a field producer there, which was my first time doing that, which was really fun. But for the most part, I do a lot of it from our offices, and I work with a really awesome team worldwide that I'm able to get, photogs that are able to help me out, and people in other bureaus around the country. NBC has obviously a very wide reach, but yeah, no, it's I have a really awesome team that I'm able to do a lot with very little time, comparatively to a lot of larger documentary style pieces.
And what is it like working for a big brand like NBC? Did you ever go through that phase like, wow, do I belong here? Or did you have that confidence right away? Or how long did that process? And I know you like interned there,
Yeah.
I think, right before your senior year. So I guess you
Yes.
had a little connection already to CNBC.
Yes, I was really, so full disclosure, I had no idea what CNBC did when Max Utzler, who was my professor at the time, said, have you ever thought about maybe applying to CNBC? I knew nothing about business news. I knew nothing about finance news. But I was like, sure, I'll give it a shot. I felt totally like a fish out of water. I was like, I don't know what any of this means. I've never heard the word EBITDA before. Earnings, like, what is that? But yeah, once I jumped in at CNBC, I was on Squawk Box, and I really, really liked that world. I liked being in kind of a niche portion of news. It made things feel a little bit more palatable and able to, the term I always use is that business news is like the seed of all other news, right? If layoffs are happening at a company, you're going to hear about that maybe 2-3 months ahead of time, because in their earnings are going to talk about, well, we might have to streamline, right? They'll use language like that. So being at CNBC kind of opened up this world to me where I was able to say, like, hey, there's this whole other part of news that I haven't been exposed to yet. And I really, really enjoyed my time there. So when I came back, 5 years down the line, I was just really, really excited to jump back into that world. And I feel really at home at NBC. I have worked at a couple New York City outlets. And while I really enjoyed working at those outlets, they were digital media outlets, so they had kind of a startup feel. And you have to be scrappy at those places. A lot of the stuff you're doing at those kind of outlets are, use your resources. You've got to do it all on your own. We don't have a huge right? We don't have photogs all over the world that we can send out to shoot stuff for you. So you got to figure out how you're going to pull this off, which is fine. And it made me a really good journalist, and it made me really self-sufficient. But at the same time, it's nice being at NBC now and having those resources and having access to all kinds of people, the talent, the experts that we have access to. I worked on pieces with our on-air talent, which is awesome. I did a piece on YouTube with Alex Sherman, who's the digital tech reporter, and it just opened up a whole new world for me as far as getting resources and access to people I previously hadn't had that kind of access.
Now, producing, is that something you kind of fell in love with during your time at KU, or did that kind of develop late in your college career, early professional?
I was a weirdo. I was one of the people that knew exactly what I wanted to do right off the bat. So I knew I wanted to do journalism when I came to KU, and I met Cal. My first, I think it was before classes even started, I walked up to him, I said, I want to do broadcasting. And he said, well, you can't do broadcasting yet because you have to do, J101 and get through those initial classes. But he said, if you want to, you can volunteer at the student station. So I was on Good Morning KU my first semester, hadn't even taken a J school class yet, was jumping in right off the bat. But I got to volunteer, and while I was there, I watched the producers work. And I can't remember who it was, but I had a professor basically tell me, if you want to get good jobs and make money after college, you should probably consider maybe going into producing, because there is a huge need for producers in the live TV space. It's behind the scenes, it's not as glamorous, but there's a huge need, and that is a spot that doesn't get filled as fast. And so I was like, okay, what's the deal with producing? What is it? Like, if I'm being pushed that direction. And I just really like the idea of being able to kind of be in charge, be a leader in the newsroom, be the, guiding force for how we cover stuff, what we cover, when we cover it. And went from there. And I basically from the get was doing news producing out here.
And I know you're talking about Good Morning KU, and I know Cal found some great video of the Level Up show. What was that show like?
I did, like I said, I did Good Morning KU and KJH, and then I think it's a rite of passage for every broadcast student to try to do their own show, or at least it was back then. And I was really into the idea of doing not necessarily entertainment news, but video game news. This was way before CNBC and finance and all that. I was like, I wanted to do, video game nerd culture type show. And so I ended up making Level Up with a group of my friends, and it was a fun semester. We got to kind of just talk about what we wanted to talk about. It taught me a lot about leading a show, executive producing a show, about anchoring a show, because at that point I hadn't really, besides the Good Morning KU sitting at a desk reading the prompter, hadn't had that exposure. I taught myself a bunch of stuff on After Effects, how to make graphics, how to make intros, all of that. So yeah, it was definitely a great learning experience because it worked out a lot of, I would say, the wrinkles for me in broadcasting, where I was like, oh, this is something else I need to be paying attention to, right? Like having good lower thirds is important, because if you don't, right, it's little things like that you don't think about when you think about how a show goes together. It got me thinking about that, because now I was completely in charge of the show. There was nobody else. So yeah, no, it was exciting and it was fun, and I'm glad I did it. It was a great experience.
And I think it might have been your first job out at KU. I know you spent some time in Las Vegas, and that was in a production role too, right?
Yes. So I got hired out. Actually, I got the job before I left college as a local news producer in Las Vegas, and I was out there for 2 years at KBVU Fox 5. It was a producing role right off the bat, which I was really lucky to get. A lot of people are hired as APs out of college. But yeah, it was local news. It was covering local news. And it definitely helped having the KUJH experience out here, because I did that, and I also interned at KSNT, so I had that local news experience as well in my back pocket, and was pretty diversified by the time I hit the job market, because I had done CNBC and I had done local news and I had done student journalism, so I had a broad idea of what different types of news looked like, and that helped me going into local Las Vegas. Yeah.
So being a producer like local news, can you connect the dots between that role and what you're doing now? Are they pretty similar, or a lot totally different?
There's definitely differences, but I think the biggest similarity between what you do as a producer when you're doing live or local or anything like that, to being a long form kind of mini doc journalist, is one having the term that I always was told was nose for news, right? It's really important as a producer, especially when you're just out of college as a producer. You get thrown on the weekend shows, right? Well, not a lot of news, even for Las Vegas, not a lot of news happens on weekends. So you have to kind of start thinking, like, where can we find a story at, right? Where am I going to send my reporter at? Especially, I was a local producer during COVID, and as much as COVID itself was a big story, there was not a lot happening, and we still have to fill an hour, right? And we can't just keep running COVID numbers over and over again. So we've got to find stories. So I think that was really important, and that the term that comes up all the time is your enterprising skills, right? How well can you come up with almost something out of nothing? And not saying something out of nothing, but how well can you look at maybe a story from a different direction and say, hey, actually, there's another story here that I don't think people are considering, or, have we thought about this? Have we thought about doing a story that maybe is more person oriented than the overall big story. So I think enterprising is a huge skill that is definitely something you can learn how to enterprise, and that was something that was stressed to me while I was here, was learning how to enterprise a story. But it's definitely something that you really hone on the job, right? Like when you are out working your weekend night producer shifts and there's nothing, and you're just scratching your brain trying to come up with anything to put in a newscast, that's when you really become a really good enterprise storyteller. And I worked with a bunch of really awesome reporters that were really good at that too, and helped hone that in me, and that is definitely the connection. And I feel like that's probably why I was able to get the job I have now at CNBC, because I was able to show, hey, I have a lot of ideas for things we can do in business news that we might not have been able to cover during my time working in live TV, working at Yahoo Finance, where we're doing daily turns. This has a long tail. This is an evergreen story, but it's an important story.
Do you miss the rush of that daily produce, or do you feel like you can breathe now?
Yeah. I mean, there are times where I miss it, especially because we work with the CNBC headquarters. We work right next to the TVC people. So, when there's breaking news and you can hear the people at the assignment desk yelling, and there's reporters running all over the place and producers yelling and handing things off and typing fast, and we're sitting there like ding ding, like still working on our stories. I definitely miss that. There's a rush, but I will say it's a little bit more, I would say it's definitely a little less stressful not having to do daily turns, but there are things that I'm like, oh man, I do miss that. I miss being able to, I think one of the biggest things for me that I've had to do is making sure that I, because it's important for my job too, am very well-rounded and diversified in the way that I consume my media, because it's really easy for me now to just tune out and worry about the story I'm working on, right? Because I'm not seeing 4 or 5 TV screens every day that have all the headlines. So I've had to make a vested effort in making sure I'm checking different news outlets every morning, and then that helps me build my stories better, because then I have a good idea of what do people care about, what are people reading about, what are they seeing. Even if it's something that's not connected to my story, it might be something the next story down the line that is a topic I might jump into. So
you talk about developing your news judgment skills, and we were talking about this briefly beforehand. Talk about the importance of being able to have that creative control, because it sounds like you're in a situation where they do trust you to do the job. I mean, I always think in journalism you have to be nimble, you have to be quick. I think a big part of that is there's got to be that trust, because you can't just get bogged down with multiple people telling you, no, I think you might want to go there. So do you have a lot of creative freedom right now?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest things that I stress is, one, like I said, being able to enterprise is a huge thing, especially in national media. And when you can prove that to your bosses and show hey, I've got good news instinct, I know what I'm talking about, and this is just also, this is resonating with people. This has, 500,000 views in a week. This has 700, right? People are clicking on this. They care about this. Once you show through your first couple stories that you have that instinct, I think there's definitely a mutual trust that starts to form. And I also am a big proponent of also knowing when you don't know what you know, right? So at the same time, having that creative freedom and being afforded that is amazing. And I'm glad that I'm on a team that puts that trust in me to allow me to, follow these kind of harebrained ideas where I'm like, I read a story about this once 2 months ago and it stuck with me and now I want to keep doing something about it. But at the same time, I also am a big proponent of asking for help, right? If I get to a point where I'm like, I don't really know where to go on this story, or I don't know, I have a coworker who I know this is his beat and he follows this, so I might tap him. So I think there's definitely a good balance to be struck. But as far as my pitching process, I have a lot of freedom, and I appreciate that there's a lot of trust put in me to develop those stories and to research those stories. And I just work with a really awesome team that we work together really well and are able and allowed to follow stories that end up resonating with a broad audience, which is awesome.
In addition to all your work experience since you graduated from KU, you also found time to get a master's degree, right?
Yes, I did.
How did that figure into your plan?
I did the thing, so it was during COVID, and I was leaving my job in Vegas and kind of deciding, what do I want to do? Where do I want to be? And a lot of journalists, and I was warned about this, will go, well, maybe I should get a master's, right? Maybe it's master's degree time. And so I really wasn't sure if I wanted to stay in television at that point. So I got a master's degree in public relations and corporate communications from Georgetown, which was amazing, obviously amazing school. And I was able to make a lot of really cool connections and meet a lot of really great professors and people through that. Obviously, I'm still in journalism, so I didn't take that PR route, but I'm glad I got the degree. And I think in ways it has also, having a solid idea of what the public relations and corporate comms side looks like has helped me, I feel like, better understand how to work with companies, because a lot of what I do, because it's business and finance, I have to work with corporations, I have to work with companies, I have to talk to their media people, I have to talk to, I have to speak their language, they have to speak my language. So I think that's made me stronger in that respect, and I can also understand when I'm reading something like a press release that a company puts out and I go, this is PR speak, right? I can kind of see through, I'm like, I know what you're doing here. So it's definitely been helpful, and I'm glad I got it. Am I using it right now? Not entirely, but I have it, and it's can't go wrong, I guess, with furthering your education in that respect.
And was that an online program?
It was partially, so it started online during COVID, and then I actually did relocate out to DC to finish it in person.
Okay. And I know recently got engaged. Have you given much thought? I know journalism can be really time consuming. That work-life balance, or have you found that work-life balance already, or will that be changing here in the coming years?
I feel like so NBC has hybrid work schedule, which has been really awesome. So I'm able to work from home 2 days a week, and then 3 days a week I'm in office. And I think that's helped. Definitely during COVID, it felt like it was hard to kind of make that work-life balance establishment, right? Because it was like it's hard, especially when you're a journalist. It's hard to unplug from the news, right? You can't be like, well, I'm just going to turn everything off and tune it out, because you just naturally have that drive to keep reading the news, keep watching the news, figuring out what's happening. And I feel like having some time in office and having some time at home now has been incredibly helpful in just being able to know when I'm like, okay, I'm setting this aside, right? Like this, and now laptop's closed, we're doing something else. So that's been a huge shift in scheduling, especially because I was remote at my second job as well through Yahoo Finance. So I was being able to work a little bit at home, but mostly in the office has definitely drawn a line in my life, which I appreciate, and it significantly helps your mental health too, being able to unplug a little bit in that respect.
And are you comfortable? I mean, you've had the experience to work kind of remotely in studio. I always think the best results happen when you're collaborating. Do you feel that way, or are you pretty much like, I can do either or type thing?
I feel like I like being in office. I like the collaborative feel of being in an office with people and just being able, I'm sure my coworkers get really annoyed with me because I'm somebody who I just like, if I see something, I just kind of yell it out. And so I'll be, like scrolling through USA Today and I'm like, this is a crazy story, or I'm on Barron's and I'm like, did anybody else see this? Right. So I like to throw things out and get group feedback. And I like the collaborative, environment of being in a newsroom. And I think that's something that, being at CNBC has, and having that time in office has also helped me as far as like development as a storyteller, because then I can sit there and, maybe I'm sitting next to my boss or a coworker and I'm going through a story and I'm like, does this make sense to you? Or do you have any, like, right? Like I've been looking at the story forever. Is there a question you have that I'm not answering, right? Like I can have those organic conversations with people where the story's almost developing as we're speaking, because we are able to sit there and just talk about it in an organic way that isn't so like sending an email, have questions about this. It's, if you have a question about this while I'm telling you about the story, then I'm obviously not addressing it. Let's go back to that. It's a really wonderful collaborative environment, and my team is we all get along really great, and we're able to kind of bounce off of each other, and we get story ideas from our other people's stories, right? If somebody's working on something, and I've done that a couple times where I've been in the middle of a story and I, find a trail that veers off as part of the story, and I'm like, that's really interesting, but I can't do it right now. Does somebody else want to jump on that? We do stuff like that all the time, which is great and super helpful for the reporting process. And
I know we have a lot of students, New York's kind of their dream market. You're working for a big brand. Have you given much thought to like what's next, or have you kind of reached the pinnacle?
I don't know. I kind of like what I'm doing. I was never, and I shouldn't tell you this because you're a career coordinator. I was never a 5-year plan person. Yeah. My plan was always get to a place where I'm happy and I'm comfortable and I like what I'm doing. And I finally feel like now at CNBC I'm at a place where I'm doing what I love every day. I'm doing it surrounded by really good people. I don't feel like I'm, like coming home every day stressed or defeated. I think that's where I am, and I'm just kind of happy being in the position that I am. And if there's room for upward movement, I'd be happy to do that. I really liked when I was briefly at Cheddar, which if you're familiar with Cheddar, it's the gas station. Okay. They do the gas station news, but they also do business news. And I got to take on a bit of a leadership role there, senioring their opening bell show. And that was something I really enjoyed doing, was sitting down with younger producers. I mean, when I was here at KU, I was executive producer of the student station, right? So I got to sit down with people, talk about what they what stories they were working on, what they wanted to work on in the future, and I loved kind of taking on that mentor role. So I think that would be something I'd be excited to maybe move into in the future.
So speaking of mentor role, if I had a student right here ready to enter kind of the broadcasting world after graduation, what advice would you have for a student?
Oh gosh,
so they know.
I would say practical advice. I would give 2 words of advice. Practical advice, read your contract, because a lot of people, especially going into broadcasting is a very contract-oriented world.
Right.
And I think it's really exciting when you get a job, right? And you're like, oh, I just want to sign it right away. I want to get into that job. And a lot of people don't know what they're signing up for. And I think it's really, really important, especially as a young producer coming out of college or a young reporter in MMJ, really, when you're working in broadcasting at all, know what you're signing on to, ask questions about that. Go and talk to people that work there and say, hey, find people that are in your job. If you get hired on as an AP, find another AP and say, what do you do every day? Do you like what you do, right?
Yeah.
It's hard because, especially when you're young, you want to jump into it so quickly. But I think it's important to set realistic expectations about what you're getting into, especially with broadcasting, especially with, if you're moving far away, maybe you're moving away from family, that can be really tough, and it can be really hard on your mental health because you're working odd hours, you're in a place you don't know, you don't get holidays off for your first couple of years. So understanding that and setting those expectations early on is super important. I would definitely encourage people to do that. On a, I guess, soft skills advice, I would say foster your curiosity, right? Like, so many good story ideas come from a natural place of curiosity, and I feel like a lot of people silence that because they think, well, what would other people care about, right? And so many of my best stories just came from me going, that's odd. Yeah. Like, huh? What is it? Or just following, I'm sitting there and I'm reading an article and I'm like, how are they paying for that? Or who puts these things, right? If we're doing a story on energy and I'm like, how is the state paying for these windmills, or is the state paying for these solar panels? And then just following a rabbit trail, and you end up you probably hit a couple stories going down those paths. I did a story recently that I didn't think was going to resonate with anybody because I thought it was something that only I cared about, which is that there's a group of, I guess, retail stores that will collect data from people that are returning items and will put you on a bad returners list even if you've followed the policy. And I was like, that's crazy. And I thought it was something only I cared about. I pitched it to my boss and he was like, go ahead and do like a 5-minute video on it. See if anybody cares. It doesn't have to be a long thing. Just do it. Hit 1 million views in like 4 days. So I was like, well, obviously people care about this.
I think my wife might be on that list because she returns a few things.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just, it's one of those things where being able to understand when you have a good instinct for story and not silencing that down and being like, no, they'll say no, or somebody won't care. The worst you can do is ask. The worst you can do is pitch a story and say, I did a little bit of research on this. It seems odd. Because if you're noticing it, other people are noticing it, and you're not the only person that noticed it. So fostering your creativity, but also your curiosity will go really, really far in this business. And care about what you care about and worry about what other people are going to say about it later, but put your pitch together, and if they say no, they say no. But just being able to follow those tiny threads that might be nothing that end up being something is a really, really good skill to have.
No, well said. I'll make sure to share that with my students in class. Okay, before you have to go, we always like to finish with Fast Five.
Okay.
And I didn't share with you these questions before. So, Devan, what is your favorite New York attraction?
My favorite New York attraction is Battery Park. It is the very southernmost park on New York City. You can see the Statue of Liberty from it, and it's quiet. Not a lot of tourists go down there. It's right off of Wall Street, so generally when it's like off work hours, there's not a lot of people in that area anyway. It's beautiful. Battery Park.
What is your must-have tech skill or software skill? What's your go-to? I mean, I assume like Adobe. You're pretty savvy with Adobe.
Yeah, Adobe Premiere, Premiere and Photoshop.
You talked about, and I think you have this on your LinkedIn or Twitter profile, you're a nerd enthusiast. How does one become a nerd enthusiast?
You can be a nerd enthusiast about anything. I think there's certain things that people box it, like nerddom into, right? Like, I love video games. I love Dungeons and Dragons. I obviously, we talked about Level Up. I love that. But just being unapologetically a fanatic about something, I feel like, is being a nerd enthusiast. And you should, especially when you're at KU. If you were a closet nerd in high school, this is the place to go full nerd, right? This is place. There are D&D clubs. There's I don't know if they still have the D&D lounge, the Roll20 lounge, but they used to when I was here. There's anime clubs. There's all these people. You will find your people here, and there's news organizations that hire people that do that kind of news. So yeah, follow that nerdiness, and you'll find friends, I'm sure.
When you're not producing at CNBC, how do you unwind? What do you do for fun?
Oh gosh, I've been trying to read more. I've been pushing myself to read more. I do play video games. I feel like I gave that away and played D&D with actually some friends from here at KU. We all still play D&D together on Discord, and I do. I work out. I try to walk. I get outside. Try to turn the TV off. It's very easy. And I try to get off my phone. That's a big thing with work-life balance as a journalist. Doom scrolling, just sitting on your phone being like, oh my gosh, look at all this news. Yeah, turn your phone off, walk away from it, find something else to do. Those are my big, I guess, hobbies. Quotation mark hobbies, yeah.
And last of the Fast 5 questions, what was your favorite journalism class at KU?
Oh gosh, my favorite journalism class. I took a lot of classes I liked. I'd say probably Cal's intro to broadcasting claess. He's just probably celebrating back there. Yeah. Just because we got to do so much. So when I first took that class, it was my second year of my freshman year, and you can't really do anything when you first take that class, right? Because you have to learn how to operate a camera, and you have your foundational skills, which are super important. And I was part of a group called A Slice of Cheese, which was a comedy show, I guess, and they went out and they would record people coming out. Gosh, I don't even know if I should talk about this. They would talk. I mean, we did it on air. They would record people coming out of bars and interview them, and it was it was called like bar interviews, and it was kind of like a Daily Show-esque, right, where they would ask funny questions to students outside the bars. And it ended up going viral. I think our first one that we recorded, and that was so much fun. That was the first time I'd ever really been like, oh, what we're doing, people watch this, right? Like this isn't just student stuff. Like this stuff goes online and people pick it up and watch it and think it's funny. And it got shared on, I think, a couple Barstool accounts and Total Frat Move. I don't even know if that outlet still exists, but yeah, no, it was a really fun class, and I got to do a bunch of stuff that I had previously didn't have access to in high school because I went to a smaller high school and I did yearbook in high school. So being able to play around with cameras and kind of do different takes on broadcasting was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, Devan, hey, again, I appreciate your time. I know you're on a busy schedule during your short time here in Lawrence, and always like to close with cheers to careers. This is our 74th episode. So Devan, cheers.